Welcome everybody. Now despite all the snow and ice you might see around me, spring is definitely beginning to take hold here in New Hampshire's White Mountains. With the snow melting and the spring rains coming, the streams and brooks are starting to swell with water, making this an ideal time for waterfall photography. So I thought I'd come out and give you 4 quick tips on how to improve your waterfall photos. Tip number 1 is to shoot on an overcast day like today. Anytime you have overcast, mist, a little bit of fog, it creates this beautiful diffuse light and it really reduces the contrast in the scene. On bright sunny days, you get this high contrast light where you might have white water in direct sunlight and you might have rocks and trees in the shadows, and you won't be able to keep detail in both areas in one exposure. But by shooting in diffuse overcast light, you even out the light on the scene and you're able to capture all those details. Tip number 2 is to use a polarizer. A polarizing filter will help reduce glare on the surface of the water, which is reflecting that bright overcast light above. And that'll bring out the beautiful earth tones in the stream bed and overall improve the color saturation of your photograph. I really recommend using a polarizer 90% of the time you're shooting waterfall shots. Tip number 3 is to think about your shutter speed. Now when you're shooting waterfalls or any kind of moving subject, you have to decide, do you want to freeze the action or do you want to blur it? Now typically with waterfalls, it's really fun to let the water blur by using a slow shutter speed. I typically use anywhere from 1/4 second to 30 seconds or even a minute, but anywhere between 1/4 second and 2 seconds will give you a nice milky water look. Now to achieve that, you'll need to use a low ISO like ISO 100 or 200, maybe a small f-stop like f11, f16. And if you still don't have a slow enough shutter speed, you may need to add a variable neutral density filter, which will block some of the light coming into your sensor and allow you to use a slower shutter speed. Although that polarizing filter I recommended in tip 2 will also block a couple stops of light and help you slow your shutter speeds down to get that nice milky water effect. Now if you want to freeze the action, you'll need to do the opposite. You'll want to use a faster shutter speed, like 1/250th of a second or faster. Now to achieve that, you might need to use a higher ISO, like ISO 400 or 800, or even ISO 1600. You'll also might want to use a faster aperture, a bigger f-stop, like f4, f5.6. If you do those things, you'll be able to use a faster shutter speed and freeze the action. So my last tip is to think about using different focal lengths and perspectives when composing your waterfall shots. There's basically 2 types of perspectives I like to use. The first is to use a telephoto lens for anywhere from 100 to 200 millimeters and zoom in on interesting graphical details within the waterfall. Look for repeating patterns of water falling down the waterfall. Look for places where water might be splashing off a ledge in the middle of the waterfall so you can compose a nice tight shot of water falling straight down but also moving across the frame. And also look for those little details like ferns or flowers that might be embedded in the wall of the waterfall and use those as other elements to balance off the falling water. Now the other perspective I like to use is a wide angle perspective, and I like to do this and move a little further away from the waterfall and include maybe a leading line or curve of the stream leading up to the waterfall, or some interesting foreground elements like boulders and rocks or rapids that can add some visual depth to the scene. Well, I hope these tips help you when you're out there having fun in the high water shooting waterfalls this spring. To see more of my work, please visit EcoPhotography.com, and for more photo tips, go to monkmanphoto.com. Thanks a lot.